The Blazers as of late have been a bit disappointing, though they have been winning a bit more as of very recently. With them being healthy outside of Zach Collins, they have not been the best team in the world, despite the fact that it's been argued the whole season that, hey, once they get healthy, they're going to be very good. And when they were not healthy, they were actually arguably better. And as a result, a lot of people have been talking about the Blazers in the present, their struggles and all of that, but to me, I can't help but wonder about this team's future. Unfortunately for me, when I reflect and think about what the Portland Trailblazers will be in the coming seasons and eventually in the very long term, I cannot look at it as anything more than just a sinking ship unless some outrageous circumstances occur. So let me talk about why the Blazers' future is a tad bit bleak. And shout out to B-Souls for the title. Before I continue on with this video, about half of the people who watch these videos are not subscribed, so if you fall into that 50%, then please subscribe. Also drop a like on this video, it only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference. Also real quick, the newest deep dive is the most recent video over on this channel. It is maybe probably my second favorite video on this channel after the Kobe video, so go check that one out. I think it's fantastic. It's the best one that I have done in forever, so please go give that a watch. It's going to be linked in the description, pinned comment, top link for all of that stuff. Yeah, move on with the video now. The Blazers have issues with their current roster construction. As of now, their three most important players are all roughly the same size. Norman Powell is, I think, like an inch taller than Damian CJ, and he has a longer wingspan, and he's definitely well built, so he's a little bit bigger than the two, and I think he can handle himself versus most small forwards in the league. But when you add on to it that the Blazers already have a very weak defense, having a 6'3", 6'4", small forward is not an ideal situation. Then when you add on to it that their best, or not maybe their best, but at least their most impactful defensive player, just because center is the most impactful position, Jusuf Nurkic, has not been playing because he has been injured, and he's kind of injured all the time. I think we had this discussion on a podcast, I believe, where I think Mojo said that Jusuf Nurkic is so injured that Blazers fans are always saying when Nurkic gets healthy, but like that always never seems to be the case. So yeah, Nurkic is injured constantly, and in the games he has played this year, he has been much worse than in years previous because those injuries may have caught up. They also have forwards who are kind of defensive specialists who have not been that impactful on the team's defense. Sure, they play good defense, but I believe the Blazers are one of the bottom defensive teams in the league. I know they're towards the bottom at the very least, and I'm pretty sure they might actually be 30th. And they have Derrick Jones Jr., who is a lockdown defender, Robert Covington, who is a fantastic team defender, and yet the team's defense has been bad. Part of that has to do with Terry Stotz, and we'll talk about him in a second, but I think these guys' impact maybe isn't as big as the Blazers, when they acquired them, thought that it would be. There also isn't very much depth on this team. Carmelo Anthony is hit and miss depending on the day, and sometimes he's fantastic for them off of the bench, sometimes he's whatever. And then after that, it's young players and Derrick Jones Jr., who I said, pretty much pure defensive guy who doesn't contribute much on offense. It can get rough. In terms of young talent, there is no clear future star to bank on, and even if any of the young guys that are on this team became future stars, I imagine it would happen within like 3 to 4 seasons, and that doesn't really fit the timeline of this team. Anything is possible. Maybe Anthony Simons ends up being very good, but as of right now, I don't think he's making that jump anytime soon, and it's not going to work alongside Dame. And even if it did, that's another like 6'3" player who is core to your team, so that wouldn't even really be that helpful. Let's talk about Terry Stotz. He fucking sucks, and Blazers fans will be happy to tell you that. And there are reports that suggest that Terry Stotz will no longer have a job once this offseason is over. My God, did that take long enough. He has a lot of issues, so let me go into those. He really doesn't have an offensive system. There's obviously plays that happen, but it is very basic. It's almost like a Scott Brooks with the OKC Thunder when they had Kevin Durant. Like, there's some stuff here, but it's almost like Scott Brooks's offense was KD good. It seems like Terry Stotts' offense is Dame Lillard good, and that's like pretty much it. There's some off-ball stuff, there's pick and roll action, but for the most part, the offense is pretty simplistic. His rotations are not the best, which is pretty standard for a bad coach, but then the biggest thing that stands out to me is if you're not going to be impactful offensively, really, you should at the very least be a good defensive coach. And Terry Stotts is not a good defensive coach. What I think makes that clear is that there is no defensive urgency for this team. It almost appears as though Terry Stotts does not put emphasis in defense at all. If we're going to flip the script over to a defensive coach in Tom Thibodeau, the Knicks' defensive personnel is not the greatest in the world, and yet they are a top 10 defense because Tom Thibodeau puts that emphasis in defense and disciplines his team to the extent where they really focus in on defense. Terry Stotts does not do anything like that. So when you add on to it that they are not doing anything good offensively, and then they aren't doing anything good defensively, what exactly is Terry Stotts bringing to the table to make the Blazers better? Nothing. Now, the problem with this, though, is that a lot of Blazers fans act as though Terry Stotts being fired is pretty much just going to save the franchise. And while it is definitely going to be a big improvement, say they fire Stotts and even add depth in the offseason, maybe some more defensive players off of the bench, regardless, the construction of the roster is still a problem, and even with a very good head coach, like a top 5 head coach, the Blazers' ceiling is still like a dark horse contender, not a top of the top team. A place where they have been, by the way. They've been in that tier. They've just fallen out of it. Terry Stotts should absolutely be fired, but firing him does not save the franchise. Period. More defensive urgency, a more complex offense that takes advantage of the strengths of the shooting of this team. You add depth in the offseason. Sure, the roster is going to get a lot better and be in that dark horse contender category, but that's not great. Like I said, they have been there before, and we've seen them come up short, which was understandable, but that's the thing with this Blazers team. No one holds it against the Blazers for not having made the finals because they're not really on that level. And here's the thing about that. The issues with this roster would be perfectly fine if all their core players are like 25, 26. But that's not the case. These issues would be okay if Dame wasn't 31, CJ wasn't 29, and the player they just traded a 22-year-old future star for wasn't 28 very soon. These guys are not old. CJ could probably go another like 6-7 years in the NBA and probably another 4 or 5 as a very, very good player. But when you're getting into your early 30s, that's when the sense of urgency for actually winning a championship starts to sink in. That's when we start seeing players in not terrible situations where they've been for most of their career, still leaving because they need to be in a better situation. The most obvious example being James Harden. And by the way, it's by no means a closed window at 31-32. Dirk won his championship at 32 after over a decade sticking with the Dallas Mavericks. It's very well possible, but situations like that are far and few between. He is the only example that I can point to that's pretty obvious. And the situation with the Portland Trailblazers does not line up to me for them to have some 2011 type Cinderella run, nor do they really have the assets to trade for a superstar player to kind of just fix things. So what exactly do they do? That's the question that bounces around in my head every time I think about the Blazers. What is the next step to get them to the next level? I'm not finding it. There's ways to improve the roster. I pointed them out. They're pretty obvious. But what's the way where you improve it from bottom tier playoff team to top of the top contender? Especially in an NBA that has some very stacked teams at the top. How are the Blazers cracking into that tier with what they have now, outside of some random ass shit happening? How are the Blazers preventing Damian Lillard from becoming one of the best players of all time to never win a ring? Because Right now, the only way I see Dame winning a ring is with another team. So how are the Blazers preventing that outside of trading Damian Lillard? And that's not me saying that they should do that, because if I'm just looking purely from the franchise's perspective, I'm holding on to Damian Lillard until the day that I die. And I think holding on to him until he retires a Blazer is very well possible, because Dame does have that loyalty. I don't think a James Harden type situation is going to happen, because even if Dame did ask out, it's not going down like that. But with me being a big fan of Dame, I can't help but feeling that with this team, the clock is ticking, or as the thumbnail cleverly says, Dame time is running out. Very smart, I know. But with me really liking Dame, at a certain point, I'm going to reach a breaking point where I want the Blazers to trade Damian Lillard. And I personally just hope that when that breaking point has truly been reached, Damian Lillard will look at the situation, and while caring about being loyal to the Blazers, will still do what's best for him and ask out to join a contender. I do ultimately hope that he does win one in Portland, though, because sure, a ring is a ring, but 2011 was amazing because Dirk did that with a team that he was with for years. And also from a small market perspective, it would be very good for the NBA for a homegrown superstar who's been there his entire career to take his team to a championship win with a small market team, although they're not the smallest market in the world, but for a team to do it that way would be good for the NBA in terms of super teams being formed and things like that. But unfortunately, if I'm just looking at it purely from what I think is going to happen, the future does not have a championship for the Blazers anytime soon, and with Damian Lillard, and that worries me for him and for them. At the end of the day, if Dame played out his entire career in Portland and just had a fantastic career, did not win a championship, that would still be very meaningful. Championships are not everything, but I'd like to see Dame win one, and I don't see it happening in Portland. I very much hope I'm wrong, though. Again, go check out that deep dive if you haven't already. It's pretty good, so go watch it. Yeah, that's it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, but that is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.